Okay, distinguished experts, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this side event on behalf of Sierra Leone, Sweden, UN Women, and UNODC, and to moderate this exchange of experiences on a topic central to UNODC's work on justice reform, women's equal access to justice through legal aid. I'm John Brandolino, the Director of the Division of Treaty Affairs for UNODC, and I'll be moderating today's event. And as you just heard from the voice before me, the event will be recorded. I'd ask that everybody please mute their microphones, and if you need to take the floor at any point, please do so in the chat function, and you can also leave messages there for the participants if you'd like. So legal aid is an essential element, as we know, of a fair, humane, and efficient criminal justice system that's based on the rule of law, as enshrined in Goal 16 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The focus on women and other specific groups is necessary to achieve gender equality and to reduce discrimination, as stressed in SDGs 5 and 10, as we strive to achieve the overarching objective of the 2030 Agenda, and that's to leave no one behind. Our event today will discuss approaches and good practices to address gaps in women's access to legal aid as a pathway towards gender equality and women's empowerment, with a focus on the contributions of legal aid providers and civil society organizations. It'll showcase recent experiences implemented in Sierra Leone and Liberia, including with support from a joint UNODC UN Women project in Western Africa, that among other activities developed a training tool and an e-learning module on gender-sensitive services for legal aid providers in English and French, and we'll share the links to those tools in the chat of this event. A recent independent evaluation of the project indicates that supporting legal aid providers is a worthwhile investment that enables better and more gender-sensitive services for women, particularly in remote communities. And we'll hear experiences from Nigeria and from the Women Development Organization that highlights efforts across the African continent to enhance gender equality and protect and provide justice to victims of sexual and gender-based violence against women in a number of communities. You're most welcome to introduce yourselves in the event chat, as I mentioned, and post any comments so that our panelists can read and react to them. Now, due to unforeseen circumstances, our two high-level speakers were not able to join us today, and so we will be reading their prepared remarks. I will start the session with reading the opening remarks on behalf of the Executive Director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Ms. Gada Wali. And I will read her remarks right now. Across the world, women face greater risks of violence and exploitation. As conflict and instability grow, ailing economies and volatile security conditions deepen inequalities and leave women more exposed to crime and violence. Sorry, I was muted for a second. Around 1 in every 3 women has been subjected to physical or sexual violence at least once in her lifetime, and many women are killed just for being women, a problem that has seen an ugly resurgence in some countries, even here in Europe. More than 70% of detected human trafficking victims over the last 15 years have been women and girls, most of them for sexual exploitation, and millions more are in danger of being trafficked today, including as a result of a conflict in Ukraine that has displaced around 14 million people. Despite the immense risks they face, women find it more difficult to access their rights in criminal justice systems around the world. As victims, witnesses, suspected offenders, and prisoners, women find unfair and unjustifiable barriers between themselves and justice. As they come into contact with criminal justice institutions, women and girls encounter a male-dominated sector that leaves out crucial gender perspectives. The very first person they are likely to interact with as a police officer, on average more than 6 times more likely to be a man than a woman. And the discrepancy often persists with the criminal justice chain, from judiciary to prosecution and beyond. Beyond the people they are dealing with, women and girls also face discriminatory criminal laws and procedures that create systemic obstacles to their fair treatment. And at every step of the way, they contend with gender bias, stereotyping, and stigma, which remain deeply rooted in attitudes and policies, particularly when it relates to certain forms of crime and exploitation. We must do better. We need targeted interventions in criminal justice systems around the world to ensure that those systems are equipped to deal fairly and effectively with women in conflict with the law, as well as survivors of crimes like gender-based violence. Providing legal aid is especially important, focusing on gender-responsive assistance for women who may otherwise be denied access to justice. To achieve a long-term and wide-ranging impact, legal aid for those at risk being left behind should be linked to broader police, judicial, and prison reform interventions and make a key component of those interventions. Civil society is also a key partner. Our experience has proven that they have the reach to help many people others cannot. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime is committed to working with all stakeholders to provide access to justice for women and for everyone. As part of our technical assistance on criminal justice reform, we help member states enhance women's access to legal aid through legal and policy advice, as well as capacity building for legal aid institutions and service providers. And we promote laws and policies that empower women in their communities. We assist countries in implementing the United Nations principles and guidelines on access to legal aid in the criminal justice systems, as well as the United Nations rules for the treatment of women prisoners and non-custodial measures for women offenders, both of which were adopted by the General Assembly. I am proud of the impact we are making on the ground, for example, through our regional project on enhancing access to legal aid for women in West Africa, which we implemented jointly with UN Women in Liberia, Senegal, and Sierra Leone from 2018 to 2021. This project helped improve delivery of legal aid services for women, as well as advocating for women's rights in the criminal justice system at large. In Liberia, 718 women were released from prison after intervention supported through the project. We learned valuable lessons from the project, lessons which we've incorporated in our broader global program on crime prevention and criminal justice reform. And now, as vulnerability and equality deepen across the globe, our office is looking to step up our efforts to stand with women, their rights to access to justice. This year, I was proud to launch UNODC's new Women in Justice for Justice initiative, together with the Austrian Minister of Justice, Alma Zadic. The initiative aims to promote greater representation and empowerment of women in the judiciary and across criminal justice institutions, to improve justice outcomes for women and for all, as well as to strengthen support and protection of women across our areas of mandate. We'll also be launching our new gender strategy for UNODC later this year, looking to elevate the role and priorities of women in our institution and our programming. Specifically on access to justice for women, our office is aiming to build on our previous work by developing a broad package of technical assistance interventions related to legal aid for women, tailored for different regions. We'll need the support of our member states and all of our partners to take these new endeavors forward. I thank all of you participating in today's event, and I invite you to engage with our efforts to improve women's access to justice around the world. Let us stand together with women and girls everywhere in this hour of need to clear the path to justice and leave no one behind. Thank you. So I would now like to, that was the statement of our Executive Director, Ms. Gadawali. I now have the privilege to give the floor to Mr. Joseph Sinha, the Chief Director of the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs of Sierra Leone. He will deliver opening remarks on behalf of the Honorable Ms. Monty Tarawali, Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs for Sierra Leone. So Mr. Sinha, you have the floor. You have the floor, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, John.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
First of all, on behalf of the minister, who is unavoidably absent, attending to another function out of the country, I am glad to be part of this forum, which for me is very key in terms of having women and girls access to legal services. I mean, that is the basic human right issues we think as a government, as a country, we are committed to in terms of promoting the rights and protecting the rights of every citizen. Australia, as you are aware, has signed several treaties, international, CEDAW, amongst it, and also the Maputo Protocol, AU Beijing Declaration. We've signed that as a commitment to ensure the protection of women's rights and promoting human rights. In addition to that, what we did as a country in terms of increasing access to legal aid. In 2012, we instituted a Legal Aid Act, which gave way to establishment of a legal aid board to be able to provide affordable services, legal services, and so that everyone could be able to access legal services across the country. And this has been extremely remarkable services wherein paralegals are deployed across the country where court cases are not being heard. They are able to expedite those processes. And in looking at access to justice, one key area is when women are being subjected to unfair treatment, like gender-based violence. This is wherein we step in to adopt a sound policies and laws like enacting the Sexual Offences Act in 2012, which has been further been amended to be able to tighten the penalty cases of on those victims who perpetrate against women. So that 2019 Sexual Offences Act has given way to establishing the special court model to be able to fast track cases across the country. And we have been able to set up the services for those women who to be able to record the information. And one key thing which has been very absent in terms of women having access to justice is there is not been enough evidence, information. So by setting up of this one-stop center across the country, in alignment with other institutions, with support from UN Women, UNICEF, UNFPA, and other UNDP and other institutions, we have been able to have women have access to those basic services to be able to respond to their sexual-based violence needs and be able to access the information to provide evidence in court to fast-track cases. And this has really been very remarkable as I speak across the country. We have having fewer cases now being called upon and cases are being convicted in court. And we have also, as a way of strengthening our commitment as a government, as a country, we have been able to put in place policies and laws, especially the male engagement strategy, which has been developed, which we think the role of men in providing access to justice and also fair treatment to women in promoting their rights, protecting their rights is very key. And that has been rolled out and is moving on. Communities have been engaged on that. Key leaders have been involved in stepping up that strategy. And additionally, what we can adopt 10 priority areas mainstreaming gender into all national lot of impact in terms of promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, and also the protecting the rights and promoting the well-being resulted to the enactment of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Bill, which is talking about participation, 30% of women in governance, and also empowerment of women. And as I speak currently, that is tabled in Parliament, which will give a whole lot of freedom and social justice to women in this country, so that their voices could be heard and they could be also be well represented in governance, which has been very missing over the years. And these are some of the things which we have done as a country, and we think we need to improve on our legal framework as well as the policy framework to be able to have women have access to justice, and also goal 5. And as I speak currently, we have reviewed the Child Rights Act. We are in that issue of the certain laws are not being harmonized with Children's Rights Act, and girls are quite a disadvantage. So we are reviewing that, and that act is going to provide a broader scope for girls to be able to access their human, to be able to have right to freedom and access and dignified life. So that will be soon be tabled in Parliament as well, and will repeal all other acts, laws that are disadvantaged girls and promoting women's rights. So I feel very honored to be part of this process, and in terms of promoting access to justice for women and girls across the country and even across the globe. So this is, for us, is very, very good model to be replicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for your words and your discussion about what's happening in Sierra Leone. I'm now looking forward to the presentations of our distinguished experts, who will bring to light the different approaches to ensuring access to quality legal aid services through analysis of data and activities in the countries they represent. And we'll start with Mr. Abubakar Balarbe Mahmoud, the Senior Advocate and Partner, law firm of Digo and Mahmoud, and former President of the Nigerian Bar Association. Sir, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, John, and thank you, distinguished panelists. And thank you for that kind introduction. What I intend to do in the course of the next few minutes is to look at this broad theme of access to justice for women and girls, and leaving no one behind through the experience of a particular case. We have the instance of the UNODC office in Abuja been involved with here in Kano. Kano, as you know, is in the northern part of Nigeria. It's a predominantly Muslim part, and one of the high population centers in the country. So I have a few slides, which I will try to run through quickly, and hopefully at the end of it, you'll see some of the key challenges and issues that this particular experience throws up. So can we go to the next slide, please? So this is the outline of the presentation. Begin by asking who is Rahma. Rahma is the girl that was specifically involved in this particular matter. And we look at her journey through the legal system, and then look at some of the wider context in terms of the challenges faced by Rahma, and how this is a reflection of the wider context in which girls find themselves in the country, and look at some of the observations that we made in the course of dealing with Rahma's case. And then we look broadly at the barriers to access to justice, especially for girls, and then make some closing comments in terms of the way forward. Okay, we go to the next slide. Now, so the first question is, who is Rahma? So Rahma was a 16-year-old girl, and one would have expected she would have been in college and probably just working her way through her educational career. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Rahma was born into a polygamous family in the city of Kano. She lost her mother at an early age and was left to cater for her younger siblings, and ultimately herself to assume the role of a mother. At 16 years, she was still in primary school at grade 4. And unfortunately, she was forced to drop out and was married off to a cousin, bringing an end to her educational career. Go to the next slide. Now, 3 years after her marriage, her life would take a dramatic new turn, which perhaps she may never be able to recover from. When she was taken to her husband's house, her husband attempted naturally to consummate the marriage, and a struggle ensued between them, which led Rahma allegedly stabbing the husband, which led to his unfortunate death. Go to the next slide. So this was the brief outline of Rahma's journey. She was arrested and detained at the police station for the murder of her husband. This was sometimes in 2015. At the police station, she had no access to legal representation or legal advice. She was eventually charged to court for the offense of culpable homicide, punishable with death. And she was tried ultimately by the Kano State High Court at the trial that spanned a period of approximately 3 years, reflecting the inordinate delays that usually such trials go through. At the end of the trial, the court determined that Rahma was 16 years old at the time she was said to have committed the offense, and was just still a young person and could accordingly, under the laws, not be punished, not be sentenced to death. Go to the next slide. So on 26th of February 2018, she was sentenced to what is referred to under the applicable law as detention at the pleasure of the governor, which simply meant that the governor would have a discretion to keep her in prison or in detention for as long as he felt was desirable, or he could order her release if he was appropriately advised. So Rahma spent approximately 7 years in custodial facility, which was really an adult detention prison or detention facility used for detention of common criminals. And it was not until she was discovered, somehow, so to say, by the UNODC through their various access to justice activities and the prison visit that took them to the prison in Kano. And the attention, Rahma called the attention, and then the office then instructed our firm to look into her case and try to facilitate her release. We immediately, of course, went into action and set up a team of counsel, many of them young ladies, and who then visited the prison and commenced, the process. In addition, UNODC sought the support of the Presidential Commission on Correctional Service Reform and Decongestion, which also took interest in the case. So after a lot of back and forth, on the 27th of August, 2021, the governor of Kano State pardoned Rahma. An interesting thing about this was that both the governor, the Attorney General of the state, and other authorities seem to have no knowledge of Rahma and her situation. So in any way, after this effort, she was granted pardon, and with a lot of fanfare and promise for support. Go to the next slide. Now, so the question really is Rahma alone in all of this? Was her case unique? Would it be the last? We don't think so. The answer is clearly no. The case of Rahma being forced out of school and being married off is a single case, but clearly a predominant practice in much of northern Nigeria, unfortunately. Go to the next slide, please. And this gives some context in terms of statistics. 48% of girls being married off by the age of 15, 78% of girls being married off by the age of 18, and 44% of girls are married before their 18th birthday, and the country records as one of the highest rate of child marriage globally. These are some of the statistics we've come across, and which paints a very clear picture of the situation that is prevalent in the country, and also which clearly Rahma's case just a tip of the iceberg. Go to the next slide. And these are again some of the context in terms of gender-based violence in the country. Some figures here: 31% sort of experience physical violence, 9% sexual violence, and these figures relate to the age bracket 15 to 49 of the women surveyed in 2018 demographics and health survey in Nigeria. Go to the next slide, please. Now, so still on the context, so what we see really is the practice of early marriage is very common, and this is attributed to poverty, which remains a very important issue in the country. According to the World Bank, 47% of Nigerian population, which comes to about nearly 100 million, live in poverty, and this is more prevalent in the northern part. And so generally in a lot of families, you see that girls are seen as tools of economic empowerment and usually social mobility through marriage. The other context, of course, is the illiteracy and the issue of problems with girl child education, and the absence of social protection broadly against for women and girls, and which leads to this kind of situation that we've seen in the case of Rahma. Go to the next slide. So some of the specific observations in the context of Rahma's case we've seen. Obviously, there was no eyewitness account of what would have transpired. There was no forensic investigation on the part of the police. Rahma, in the course of trial and her detention, she did not receive any quality legal representation. And certain defenses that were obviously open to her were not explored. And even the whole sentence seems to have been based on a confessional statement, and which clearly, from what we saw in the records, the appropriate safeguards were not applied before obtaining the statement. So, in any event, she was found guilty, and as we could see, after her sentence, she became lost in the crevice of this legal system, and a lot of these crevices exist, and she was just forgotten. There was no appropriate mechanism for the implementation, of the process of determining the governor's, the governor's pleasure, or if there was nothing to really trigger any review, and so she was completely lost in the system. Go to the next slide. So, looking still at the context of the legal flaws, we can clearly see in the case of Rahma that the system was not responsive, the legal institutions are weak, and do not provide credible support or access to women in situations such as Rahma's. And the dysfunctionality is quite high, and the gaps in some of the procedural legislations are also quite glaring. Although in the country there has been a recent move to enact the Child Rights Act and the Children and Young Persons Law across the country, Kano has been particularly slow in dealing with this. Although we have the Young Persons Law, but some of the more modern approaches to this have not been, incorporated in the new legislation that taking shape in some other states. So, the delays and poorly trained judges, legal personnel, and inadequate manpower still remain, the prevalent situation in the state and in many parts of the country. Go to the next slide, please. So here we focus on Rahma's case, and in terms of barriers to access to justice. This case provides some clear insights into the problem. Justice is not readily and easily accessible to ordinary citizens, particularly women and girls. There are lots of cultural inhibitions for women and girls in northern Nigeria, and this stands out as a very clear barrier. And there's of course, the inherent weaknesses in the system, which highlighted some of them earlier. So go to the next slide. So just by way of concluding remarks, the lessons from Rahma's case and what is the way forward. And this is just to offer some sort of broad suggestions. I think social reforms providing women and girls social protection is very key. Public enlightenment on gender-based violence is also key. Legal reforms to provide more robust mechanisms for legal aid and ensuring quality legal representation. I think this is also fundamental. Advocating projects such as the one we've seen that brought out Rahma's case to the fore, I think is important, and it would be useful to explore scope of enhancing this sort of partnerships between developing partners, civil society groups, and other, organizations and law firms such as ours. Now, but at the bottom of it all, in our view, advocating for, expanded compulsory girl-child education will be a fundamental reform requirement to address these issues. Can we go to the next slide? I think that probably, yes. So just by way of a final comment, which is not on my slides, I think when I was discussing with organizers, one of them asked me, what is my motivation for getting involved in Rahma's case? And I reflected on it. And the motivation is not too far-fetched. I'm surrounded by exceptionally, talented and brilliant women, and very high-performing women. My wife is the judge of the Court of Appeal in Nigeria, and I know her lifetime engagement with these issues. I have three, very brilliant daughters. One of them a cardiologist, one a lawyer, and another a lawyer, an architect working in one of the top architectural firms in the world. In the office here, I have some of the brightest young girls working with me. So when I see Rahma, or girls like Rahma, it's just, such a sad, situation to see the kind of potential, that exists in our young girls and women that is not being fully, exploited. And I think every child deserves an opportunity to achieve her full potential. So this, in a nutshell, is the motivation, and this is really the case of Rahma, which I hope has, shed some light into the situation in Nigeria, and especially in northern Nigeria. So thank you, John, and I hope you found the presentation useful.
Thank you very much. No, it was a wonderful presentation, both looking at the specific situation of Rahma and then also the broader societal changes and recommendations. And I know there's a note on the chat box from the UNODC representative in Nigeria, I think, sending his appreciation for your presentation. And now I'll jump to our next expert speaker. I have the privilege of introducing Ms. Camille Massey, who's the independent evaluator of the joint UNODC UN Women Project to strengthen women's access to legal aid in Western Africa. Camille, you have the floor. Camille, are you there? I don't hear you, if you are. I see you, but we don't hear you. Are you muted? Still can't hear. No, sorry. Yeah, I know you're not muted, but for some reason we can't hear you.
Let me try without the ear,
yes,
the headphones. Can you
yes,
hear now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Camille.
All right, we solved it. Thank you very much. Sorry for this little mishap. And thanks to all the panelists and participants. It's a privilege to be here. I'm also particularly pleased to see there are both men and women amongst the participants and the panelists. And this is particularly useful in the topic that occupies us today. So I was the team leader for the independent evaluation of the project that triggered today's event, Improving Access to Legal Aid for Women in Western Africa. And we were a team of 2 independent evaluators working on this. Next slide, please. Right, so I will be going through the key findings of our evaluation, the best practices that we identified through this evaluation, and the main recommendations to all the stakeholders, UNODC, but also their partners and donors. Maybe let me just remind quickly the audience about the structure of the project. I don't think it was evoked yet today. The project was structured around 3 components. One was a component on policy and lawmaking in partnership with the legal aid providers and with obviously the national authorities of all 3 countries covered, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Senegal. The second component was support to the legal aid providers. Mostly these were, in this case, civil society organizations focused on providing legal aid with a specialization on providing legal aid to women and girls. And the third component was regarding information and outreach and empowerment of women, especially focusing on the most remote communities. And in a way of giving women access to the legal services that were offered and supported through the project. I just wanted to remind us of this because I realize in the audience that some people may not have been fully aware of the structure of the project. Next slide, please. Right, so the key findings are organized according to the regular classical evaluation criteria, the first one being how relevant the project was. I think in my career as an evaluator, I have seen only very few projects with such a high level of relevance. The topic is particularly relevant, and it is also grossly underserved, both by national budgets and by donor funding when it comes to the countries where international cooperation takes place. And in this case, the 3 countries where the project took place are no exception. The target groups, so women and girls in contact with the law, is a particularly underserved, a particularly underserved group with very important, very high needs. And I would also like to highlight that in this case, of course, it's about access to justice. And I think I would like to really thank Mr. Mahmoud for his presentation earlier. This is a very good illustration of how far-reaching the consequences of this group being underserved and this topic being underserved, how far-reaching the consequences can be in matters as grave as criminal justice. But I would also like to highlight that access to legal aid has consequences in all fields of law, and as we witnessed with this project, also in more seemingly mundane topics such as administrative law or civil law, which actually form the background to ensuing issues and sometimes dramatic consequences, such as in the case that was exposed by Mr. Mahmoud. And I think this is just a very good illustration. So the target group is particularly underreached, and women and girls chronically lack access to legal advice and legal representation, both, in all fields of law, including in accessing sometimes the most simple services. And so the project activities were really tailored to respond to this need, and it chose to support legal aid providers directly to respond to these needs, which was particularly relevant. Next slide, please. The project with its three components was perfectly coherent. It was in line with the standards developed by the United Nations and the guidelines. It was perhaps, so that is a very classical finding for such an evaluation. And it built on the concepts, you may have seen the links in the chat earlier. It adapted to the highest extent possible to the COVID-19 constraints in terms of outreach to the users of legal aid. Next slide, please. Okay, so now the question was, did the project work, right? On the normative framework, policy and legislation, there was an incremental improvement, and I think that the first presentation we had by Mr. Joseph was illustrative of how also cooperation and thinking together with the legal aid providers was fruitful for all involved, and we see that the legal and policy reforms are continuing beyond the project. Obviously, the project is just one contribution among many, and it is first and foremost a political will of the national authorities behind this. But still, we saw that there was an accelerating effect of the project. In terms of service provision, because of the funding, the legal aid providers were able to reach so many more women. And again, I think the earlier illustrations we had really show what it means for individuals. The legal aid providers became much more legitimized and networked within the communities, with the duty bearers, service providers in all fields of law, including within the justice system, but not only, and much more ready to advocate. So in a way, the project helped glue together the actors that legitimately and naturally are meant to provide access to legal services for women. Next slide, please. In terms of impact, I think I wouldn't go into a lot of details here. Some things have already been said today in terms of the number of women and girls reached, number of women and girls who were extracted from places of deprivation of liberty where they should have not been, and many human rights violations prevented or remedied. There was also a very high increase in the demand towards legal aid services. And that brings me to the next slide regarding sustainability, because essentially the demand is there, the demand is increasing. So behind sustainability is the issue of funding and the ability of the legal aid providers to continue providing this level of support. Next slide, and I will wrap up very quickly. I wouldn't go into a lot of details, but maybe for the benefit of those in the audience who are interested in follow-up activities, support to legal aid providers in providing legal aid services to women is a particularly high added value investment, if we can say so, whether for the governments or for international partners. And it's the critical mass of funding was not reached in this particular project, and that brings me to our recommendations and good practices. So working through established legal aid providers was particularly worthwhile in terms of added value, as we said. and it was also particularly valuable to basically get these legal services accessed and realized, even though the national legal and policy frameworks were still being worked on, because it provided an experience of how it can work and how worthwhile the services are for all the stakeholders involved, which is an encouragement for the national authorities to go further in adopting legislation. And I will close now with recommendations about resource mobilization. I think we have said it. Programming, I think in Mr. Brandolino's introduction, we saw that follow-up is happening. So I'm very happy to hear that. And I think today's event is an illustration of the synergy between the various components of judicial and rule of law reforms, and that legal aid provision to women is but a part of that. Thank you very, very much. And I'm happy to go back if there are any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camille, so much for providing the background and lessons learned relating to the project. Our next speaker is Mr. Francis Colley, the Country Director of Prison Fellowship Liberia, who is a long-term implementing partner of UN Women and UNODC in enhancing access to illegal aid in Liberia. Mr. Colley, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks to the planner of this program, my distinguished colleagues and panelists. Thank you very much. So PF Liberia, I'll call it Prison Fellowship Liberia, as you heard from John, partnership with the UN Women, UNODC to implement effective access to justice for women in various counties in Liberia for a couple of months. Please go to the next slide. Next slide, John, please. So you will see we have key partners that we have worked with over the years to have us implement a couple of projects for women. You have the UN Women, UNDC, UN Women, UNODC, PFR, CWA, national government, which is Ministry of Justice, very much key to us, Ministry of Gender, civil society organizations. We provide a lot of training for them, community-based organizations as well, traditional leaders. They are also very key to our work, especially when it comes to legal aid for women in the rural areas. Next slide, please. So the context is Liberia prison populations. Prison Fellowship Liberia is organizations primarily work with prisoners and detainees around the country. Even though we do work largely into different communities, but we focus more on the prisons and police stations where detainees and accused have been detained for whatever reason. So if you know the current population of Liberia prisons, as we speak, is around 3,000 plus, and detainees constitute about 2,142 plus. Women behind bars constitute about 160, 140 are pretrial detainees, 15 sentenced women, and 5 female juveniles of the national overall inmate populations. Monrovia Central Prison happened to be one of the biggest prisons that account for 48%. Until the 8th, struggling with restitution before being released. Now, why I have to mention this? A lot of women incarcerated in prisons are there for minor crimes, but some of the crimes committed by the women are such like action of debts. Many they went and took loans and they were not able to pay on time. And so bulk of them got a release, but then you cannot get your release if you are not restituted the amount of money that you have taken as loan. So that's why you have the number of persons. Then you have more than 30% of women are faced with legal reported issues at the community levels, police stations, courts around the country. Liberia is such that women's marginalizations is still very prevalent in most of the communities. And so 30% of our women are faced with some legal reported cases. Either it might be gender-based issues, it could be sexual-based issues, it could be marital issues, child marriage and all of that, or gender mutilation issues. So these are all components of issues that women are faced with in Liberia. There are 38 probate defenders with the populations of over 5 million persons. And out of that, you have the ratio to that is one person, one probate defender to 132 or 32,000 persons. So you can imagine that legal aid is very much important, and something possibly needs to be done because the population is increasing, and women also are part of that population. So if you have 38 number of public defenders, and they are not assigned everywhere, they are just in the rural area, urban areas. So a lot of women will, of course, not have access to justice. If one public defender have to attend to 132,000 persons, so it's going to be a huge challenge. Statistically, you also know that there's an average delay of 1 to 15 days to bring accused person to court, and that could even go more in the remote parts of the country, because remote parts of the country you don't have public defenders, you don't have police, you have fewer police. You don't have lawyers that are assigned there. So it will take you 1 to 15 days, which actually is about the middle of a term, a court term, before a person can be brought, to court. Justice comes, of course, with substantial burden on the accused, especially women, girls, and children in almost all parts of the country due to logistical incapability. Now, this is another issue that is very much prevalent, because a lot of women who found themselves in jail, whether at the police stations, whether at the traditional centers, sometimes they have a lot of burdens. I mean, because they don't have lawyers to plead their cases, they don't have family members to either fight bond for them. So, of course, they will have issue of delays to be heard in court, issue of legal representations and the like. So these are context analysis that Liberia is currently faced with. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges currently in Liberia? So legal dilemma of the vow left by capacity deficit of the statutory system versus choice of customary opinions, customary being often the opinions, the options when the statutory system is unavailable or failed. This is a huge challenge for Liberia. Liberia is still dwelling on two systems, the customary system and the informal system. And this is a huge challenge because some of the cases that could be handled customarily is sent to statutory system. Now that again is a dilemma, and with the capacity deficit that we have in the system, we talk about less number of public defenders, less number of paralegals, police in the various countries. These are challenges are very important. One of the challenges we face with even implementing the projects, sustainability of success best practice. There are good practices that we taught, for example, the Community Legal Forum. Community Legal Forum, it was meeting for women where women came and expressed their challenges and how could they gain or have access to justice. Now that Community Legal Forum have a lot of women to have an education as to how they can access justice where lawyers are not prevalent, where police stations are not present. They could represent themselves. So when you empower a woman or a girl legal aid how to represent themselves, they don't have to build abuse by the opposite sex. We have instances where some of the women told us that some of the male counterparts asked them for sex, in exchange for legal representations. I mean, that was quite humiliating. So those are things that we really face as challenge. Now, another challenge, the difficulty of enhancing the logistical deficiency of the duty barriers. Of course, we just mentioned that police are not fully funded under national government budget. The courts, of course, you'll hear that some of the courts, they don't even have stationery. So when an individual, especially women, get into jail, it takes weeks, months for their cases to come on the docket. One of those constraints, the judge will tell you they don't have logistical support to bring witnesses, to bring even the defendants or the accused to court. These are logistical deficiency that we encountered during the project. The fight to end gender inequality and gender-based violence in urban and rural communities is again another huge challenge. Why? Because again, capacity deficit. You don't have all of these security apparatus present. The fewer civil society organizations that are there, they are not fully empowered logistically. So when there are abuses, gender inequality, gender participations, it becomes a burden on the very women who are by and large are the most persons that are being affected by the practice. The insecurity, emotional trauma of victims in remote areas. These were another, and their release, forbidden to going back becomes a problem. So sometimes they try to relocate themselves from the community they came or the community originally were in when they were arrested by police for whatever reason. So these are challenges women face when it comes to facing, access to justice. Less number of private defenders, we mentioned that already, 8 in the total for the whole country of the population of 5 million plus. So again, women are going to be the last person or the last people to have access to justice because their male counterparts will want to take advantage of them, and some women will stand their ground that, well, it better I remain in jail, it better I remain in detentions, but I'm not going to succumb to whatever your demands are. So that again is a problem. Challenges we face, funding gaps to sustain gains made. Currently, since we ended the project, yes, we have our paralegals and some of the legal aid providers in the counties, but you can't keep them perpetually because there's no funding. They are collecting data and sending it off. There are women in jail. There are women who have been abused, sexually abused. At the moment, we have a software that is collecting sexual and gender-based violence across 5 countries. And the number of sexual and gender-based violence we have received are quite enormous, very, very high. And so what we do is provide some pro bono services for lawyers to represent some of these women, especially those ones are very much on the rise. The next slide, please.
Mr. Colley, if I could have you to wrap up, if you could.
Yes, I do that right now. So this is our strength. We do training and training of monitors, mediators to handle cases at the police stations. Support from donors such as DCU Women, OSIWA, pro bono lawyers are also being present in some of the countries. We have set up legal aid clinics in some of the parts, some part of the country. Community police, prison centers, and court monitoring. Collection of data is very much at our advantage. Of course, continual legal empowerment forums for women, which we are continually doing. Strengthening services beyond program budget. That's what we are doing right now. We don't have funding, but we still continue to provide legal services for women. Then, of course, building the capacity of detained women, girls, and community women in accessing justice. That's one of the best things we can do right now in the absence of money to strengthen women in prisons and women in detention center. So we hope to do more for women as they access justice. Next slide, please. These are success stories. So we provided 5,409 legal aid interventions from 219 to women and girls from police stations, courts, which represent 22%, and made 78% from 14 countries in Liberia. Legal aid policy document prepared and being pushed for legislation right now, as you are aware, some of you. The legal aid policy document is now being pushed to the House of Representatives, hopefully for legislation. The new program that we are currently carrying out, community legal empowerment, which we're empowering a lot of women and even men are also being empowered. The new monitoring apps, we are collecting data on SGB cases that we heard. It's a pilot project funded by OSIWA, but that project ends by September. And then, of course, we look forward to continue that project. Next slides. Well, these are the constraints. Of course, it's in the presentations, but we hope we can overcome those constraints. Some progress as well. Next slide, please. Way forward. Sign of strong legal aid provision mechanism with extensive community legal empowerment forums will be pivotal points in the effort of this, but all over us. For time's sake, I want to thank you for allowing us to be part of this, and thank you so much.
Thank you for such a very good picture of what's happening in Liberia. It's very interesting, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but we are running out of time. Because we do have two more speakers, one that will sum up, but our final speaker, expert speaker, will be Dr. Afnan Al-Shabi. She is the executive, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. She's the executive director of the Women Development Organization, a new intergovernmental organization under the auspices of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So you have the floor.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good morning to everybody. It's very interesting just hearing all of you. Coming the last person or before last makes it very difficult to say more than what was said. But let me just start to say that I'm very grateful, and I'd like to express my appreciation to UNODC and all the countries that have been participating in this event. Legal aid is an essential component for fair, humane, and effective criminal justice based on the rule of law. It is a foundation for the enjoyment of other rights, including the right to a fair trial, and an important guarantee for fundamental fairness. For those who don't know the WGO, it's a newly established international organization that is working on programs and activities geared towards supporting and advancing women's and girls' empowerment in the member states of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The WGO is the center of gender equality architecture of the OIC system and has 4 mandates, which are supporting normative and policy change, advocacy and outreach, coordination, and operational activities. All of these mandates jointly seek to advance gender equality and women's empowerment, promote, protect, and fulfill the human rights of women and girls within the OIC states. I have to say that we're here today to discuss a very crucial subject about women and their access to justice, especially that those barriers hinder women from accessing legal aid due to the lack of gender-sensitive legislations, policies, services, and insufficient knowledge of their rights. Women all around the globe are generally faced with difficulties when it comes to accessing global legal aid. However, the situation of women in conflict-prone areas is further more important and generalized violation of these fundamental rights. There is no doubt that the whole world is currently suffering from the financial crisis, in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, which are all furthering the already existing gap between men and women. It's worth mentioning that WGO has 4 priority thematic areas within its first pragmatic cycle, which are of interest to the member states, namely, number 1, promoting women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion, elimination of all forms of violence and harmful practices against women and girls, strengthening the role of women in fighting and preventing corruption, and women's leadership in promoting peaceful and inclusive societies. As you can see, all these pillars are very well connected to the issue of providing legal aid and access to justice. We can help these women access justice through empowering them emotionally and eliminating all forms of violence against them through awareness raising and the provision of legal aid. We in the WGO believe in the collective work with which we can face all these difficulties and challenges together as international organizations. And under the lead and the request of our member states, our work in the field can reflect some solutions on this issue as we are about to launch a think tank and a Center of Excellence on Gender Studies affiliated with the organization and is sponsored by the government of Egypt and supported by the UN Women. This will help in fostering strategic inequalities and also advancing gender equality and women's development. And of course, the issue of legal aid is one of the topics the think tank will be tackling. I just want to say that the think tank is more of a digital legal library, and it will be established and will serve as an information and documentation center for the already existing laws and regulations in place for all the member states of the organization of OIC. It is also going to be helping in enhancing the legal awareness and empowering the member states, raising the awareness of women and girls about their rights and duties in their own laws and regulations, and advising governments to deal with their legal gaps towards women's issues. In addition to that, WGO is designing a one-stop center for women and girls victims of violence. It will provide them with services that they need, and one of them is legal aid and awareness raising. I don't want to take more of your time, as I respect that we are already have exceeded the time. But I just like to say, as a final word, that the international cooperation is crucial to provide our women and girls with their real needs. The participation of our women and girls in decision-making about their own needs is equally crucial in order to serve them properly. I just want to thank you all for your kind attention and wish you a successful deliberations during this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Shabi, and it's really great to hear about the new organization and the work that you have planned and the things that you're doing, including the database. So thank you so much for your presentation. So that actually concludes our expert panel. I'd like to thank all of the distinguished speakers for joining today and providing their insights. the examples of your work that you share really are inspiring. We've got a lot of great comments on the chat function that you should take a look at. And we hope that everyone found them useful and interesting. We certainly did in UNODC. And now I have the pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Beatrice Duncan, the Senior Policy Advisor for Constitutional Access to Justice of UN Women. She will close the event. She has been personally involved in the implementation of joint legal aid activities with the Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice section of UNODC, and we're very happy to look back on our many years of fruitful partnership with UN Women in this area and hear from Beatrice as she closes the event. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, John. And let me say that indeed we are extremely proud to be a long-standing partner of UNODC, and I think the credit does go to UNODC for really steering many of these ideas and projects, and we are really happy to be part of this partnership. The speakers have said it all, and what I would like to do is to throw out some issues for reflection as we move and march towards, I would say perhaps it could be a second phase, or as we move to the next level of programming in legal aid. At UN Women, we have the tendency to view legal aid holistically. We believe that it's important for us to always remember that legal aid must be provided in all contexts. Within the context of the criminal justice system delivery, where we have two parts, where women are in conflict with the law, they must be given access to legal aid. But when women are also victims of the law, they must be also provided with legal aid. In the civil justice area, where we have issues such as family law, access to property rights, and child maintenance, child custody, and child support issues, women must also be seen as, being able to access legal aid in order to defend their rights and also to enforce their rights. So please, as we close this session, it's important for us to part with this comprehensive view of legal aid. But coming back to the topic at hand, where we are looking at women in the criminal justice system, one thing that has always struck me as interesting is that the prison population, as we have it all over the world, is growing in a particular way, where we see the rate of women as prisoners increasing at a faster rate than that of men. And it's very important that we ask ourselves why. Could it be that the reasons for which women are being accused of crimes are not really reflected in our statute books? Women being accused of petty offenses that really should not be bringing them into the criminal justice system? And if so, why is it that women are not benefiting from diversion and other similar programs? It's important that we ask ourselves whether some of these situations can be prevented. What are the social and economic programs and social protection programs in our various countries that exist that can actually support women and prevent them from being exposed to the criminal justice system? Unfortunately, we know that even young girls, adolescent girls, are being exposed to the criminal justice system for the wrong reasons, primarily because perhaps they are being trafficked, have been victims of trafficking, And for that reason alone, you know, they are seen as criminals and have to be exposed to the criminal justice system. And issues such as prostitution, issues such as adultery must be looked into. And the ways in which the testimony of a woman is viewed at the police station, in society, as well as in a court of law. We must also remember that legal aid does not exist in a vacuum, and that there are various facets within our society that make it more meaningful. For example, if we didn't have discriminatory laws, I strongly believe that our legal systems will be much more effective, and the delivery of legal aid will also be much more effective. Unfortunately, every single country has at least one discriminatory law existing in their statute books. We need to look at the issue of discrimination in law. I would like to encourage all of us to go back to have conversations with our ministries of finance. The reason being that it's important that we also look at financing, the financing of women's access to justice. And in fact, you see, when we are looking at women's access to justice, it is now very clear that we cannot just look at how it impacts upon women. We also have to look at the justice sector as a whole. How is the justice sector functioning? We have been through a pandemic. The pandemic has really brought to the fore the weakness of our justice systems. We need to use this opportunity of building back better to find ways and means of rebuilding our justice systems as a whole in order for them to support women. Having said that, what are some of the areas that we need to look at as far as women are concerned? There are several women in prison with their children. How can we prevent this from happening? And if this is not preventable, how can we support women to, you know, who are in prison with their children to be able to lead lives that are of dignity and lives that we can be proud of? The second issue that we need to look at is rehabilitation. To what extent are we preparing women to leave the prison environment? Because we know that when women are not economically sound, the household will not be sound, and women themselves may enter into another cycle that would send them back to prison. So the rehabilitation process needs to be looked at. And then thirdly, we must not put all women into one cluster. Women are not a homogeneous group. We have minority women, indigenous women, rural women, women of different religious backgrounds. And I'm so happy that Dr. Hafnan spoke. We need to respect the situation of Muslim women, for example, the situation of Christian women, Buddhist women, and so forth and so on. Unfortunately, our prison environment, it has never been ready for women, because prisons were built by men for men. And so therefore, even the physical infrastructure has never been ready for women. Moving forward, I think that the fiscal space in which ministries of finance determine how much money should be allocated to various sectors must consider the justice needs of women. And it is those of us on this panel, those of us who are participants in this side event, that can actually submit requests to our various ministers of finance and to engage them in strategic conversations to ensure that the justice needs of women are met financially as well as across the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you for closing this event on a very inspirational note. I want to thank everybody. I'm sorry that we don't have time for questions for our experts and others, but I really think it was a great and rich series of presentations, and we will try to distribute to those that are interested some of the PowerPoints that were used today. So thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to UNODC and our colleagues that work on the access to justice part of our house for putting all this together. And I wish you all a good evening, a good day, wherever you are. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.